Hello, guys. In this module, we are going to talk about freedom of expression, and we'll begin by taking a journey into the origins of journalism. Along the way, we'll also explore some historical cases that show why this topic still matters today. News existed long before newspapers. In ancient Rome, there was something called the Acta Diurna, literally the daily acts. It was a kind of public notice board, written on stone or metal and displayed in the forum. It contained political decisions, military victories, trials, and even gossip about important citizens. Meanwhile, in ancient China, around 8th century AD, the government produced a bulletin called the Dibao, which shared official news among scholars and administrators. And later, in medieval Europe, merchants used letters and handwritten reports to exchange information about trade and politics, the ancestors of the modern newsletter. So, before journalists, there were messengers of information who sometimes transmitted not just facts, but also rumors or propaganda. Everything changed with one invention, the printing press. When Johannes Gutenberg created movable type around 1450, information suddenly became reproducible, affordable, and public. By the 1600s, the first true newspapers appeared. The earliest one we know of was The Relation, a German newspaper printed in Strasbourg in 1605. A few decades later, England had its first official paper, the London Gazette, printed in 1665. At this point, governments realized that controlling information meant controlling people, so censorship became a major issue, and the fight for freedom of the press began. The printing press made possible the spread of the Reformation, a major religious movement in the 16th century led by Martin Luther that challenged the authority of the Catholic Church and gave rise to Protestantism. Because texts could be reproduced and distributed widely, ideas no longer stayed locked up in monasteries. Now let's move to the 18th century, the age of reason, conversation, and coffee. In London, coffee houses became the social hubs where men, only men back then, met to talk about politics, science, literature, and gossip. They were called penny universities because for just one penny, you could buy a cup of coffee and access a world of ideas. Each coffee house had its own personality. One was famous for politics, another for trade, another for literature, and people didn't just drink coffee there. They debated, argued, and read newspapers aloud. And these discussions gave birth to something revolutionary: public opinion. Joseph Addison and Richard Steele were two influential writers of the early 18th century. Addison was an English essayist, poet, and politician, while Steele was an Irish writer, soldier, and member of parliament known for his wit. Together, they transformed journalism into a tool for moral and social improvement. The first of their projects was the Tatler, founded by Richard Steele in 1709 with regular contributions from Addison. It was a periodical, an early kind of magazine, published 3 times a week. The Tatler mixed news, short essays, and social commentary, written in a refined but accessible style. Its main aim was not just to inform readers, but also to educate them, improving manners, morals, and critical thinking. A year later, in 1711, they launched The Spectator, which further developed these ideas. This new magazine offered elegant satire and thoughtful commentary for a growing literate audience. It encouraged civility, reason, and self reflection, becoming an important step in the rise of modern journalism and public opinion. In 1644, the English poet John Milton published Areopagitica, a pamphlet against censorship in which he argued that ideas must circulate freely without government control. It was one of the very first major arguments in defense of freedom of the press in history. In the late 18th century, freedom of expression gained new power thanks to figures like Thomas Paine, who used writing to influence public opinion. Paine was an English writer and political thinker who moved to the American colonies. In 1776, he published Common Sense, a short pamphlet that argued for American independence from Britain. It was written in clear, direct language read by thousands of ordinary people, not just politicians or intellectuals. It used the power of the print to challenge authority and inspire change. Paine showed that the press could be a weapon for democracy. It could inform, persuade, and unite people around a shared cause. At the same time, in France, newspapers like L'Ami du Peuple, edited by Jean Paul Marat, played a major role in spreading revolutionary ideas. From these experiences, the concept of the fourth estate emerged. The press as a fourth power in society, alongside the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Its role was to watch over them, criticize abuses of power, and give citizens a voice. Years later, in Italy, the press also became a tool for national awakening. One important example was Il Conciliatore, a Milanese literary and political journal founded by a group of intellectuals including Silvio Pellico and Giovanni Berchet. Although it was soon censored by Austrian authorities, it promoted liberal and patriotic ideas in the form of literary criticism. A few decades later, Il Risorgimento, founded in Turin by Camillo Benso di Cavour and Cesare Balbo, openly supported Italian unification and constitutional freedom. The 19th century saw the rise of mass produced newspapers, also thanks to cheaper paper and new printing techniques. Many of the world's most influential newspapers were born, like, for example, The Times, The Guardian, The New York Times, and The Washington Post. This is also when photojournalism appeared. For the first time, reporters traveled to cover events directly from the scene. The Crimean War was the first conflict to be reported by war correspondents. The most famous was William Howard Russell, a journalist for the Times of London, often called the first modern war reporter. From Crimea, he sent vivid and shocking descriptions of soldiers' suffering and poor medical care. His reports caused a scandal in Britain but also brought real change because they inspired Florence Nightingale, a British nurse and social reformer, to go to Crimea and improve hospital conditions. Thanks to her work and Russell's articles, the public began to see war not as heroic but as a human tragedy that needed compassion. At the same time, social problems like child labor, poor factory conditions, and poverty became important topics for journalists, and writers such as Charles Dickens also worked as reporters and used newspapers to expose social injustices. So, journalism went beyond politics and started to describe real everyday life, giving a voice to ordinary people and pushing society toward moral and social progress. During the two world wars and under totalitarian regimes, the media were often used as powerful tools of propaganda. Governments tried to shape public opinion by controlling what people could read, hear, and see. And in World War II, reporters had to submit every article to military censors before publication. Even photographs were carefully chosen. Images of dead soldiers or destruction were often banned to avoid shocking the public. After World War II, the idea of independent journalism grew stronger. Journalists began to see themselves not as servants of the state, but as defenders of honesty and transparency. Yet, even in those dark times, there were journalists who risked their careers and lives to reveal the truth. A famous example came during the Vietnam War. In 1971, a secret government report called the Pentagon Papers was leaked to the New York Times and the Washington Post. These documents revealed that the US government had not been honest with Congress or the American people about the real situation in Vietnam. It had hidden information and manipulated facts to maintain public support for the war. And when the newspapers tried to publish the documents, the government attempted to stop them. However, the US Supreme Court ruled in favor of the newspapers, declaring that the government could not censor or block publication. This historic victory became a symbol of the power and responsibility of a free press. If you're curious to learn more about this story, you can watch the film The Post, directed by Steven Spielberg. Just a few years later, another scandal exploded. Two young reporters from the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, started investigating a strange break-in at the offices of the Democratic Party in a building called Watergate in Washington. They discovered that people close to President Richard Nixon had organized the break-in to spy on their political opponents. The journalists kept investigating, publishing articles that revealed lies, corruption, and secret payments. In the end, their work helped uncover a huge political scandal. Under pressure, President Nixon resigned in 1974, the first US president to ever do so. The Watergate scandal showed that good journalists can defend democracy by telling the truth, even when it means challenging the most powerful people. If you're interested in this story, you can watch the movie All the President's Men. After Watergate, journalists continued to fight for transparency, but in the digital age, the battlefield is online. In 2010, Julian Assange, an Australian hacker and journalist, founder of the website WikiLeaks, published secret government documents revealing military and political misconduct of the US, especially related to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Assange spent years in legal battles and political asylum to avoid extradition to the United States. In 2024, after many years living under restrictions, he made an agreement with the US government that let him go back to Australia as a free man. For some, he remains a symbol of press freedom. For others, he is a controversial figure who endangered lives by revealing classified information. In 2015, the Charlie Hebdo attack showed that freedom of expression can be dangerous. Two terrorists entered the offices of the French satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo in Paris and killed 12 people. They said they wanted revenge for cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad. The attack shocked the world and opened a huge debate. How far can satire go, and what's the real cost of free speech? The slogan Je suis Charlie became a global symbol of support for free expression. Today, journalists face new enemies: misinformation, social media manipulation, AI, and fake news. The speed of online information makes it harder to know what's real, what's not. Every May 3rd, the world celebrates World Press Freedom Day, established by the United Nations to defend journalists' rights and promote independent media. It reminds us of Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Even the First Amendment of the US Constitution reminds us that the press must remain free, because a democracy without a free press cannot survive.